we bring you the FX market response for March 2nd. Here, we use pressure correlation to organize the foreign exchange market by examining the consistency between the pressures of 49 currencies and actual market conditions for each of the 5 major currencies. The table of the 5 major currencies explained below can be enlarged or downloaded from the Google Drive URL in the Details section. Filled square contents. By using currency pressure RINDEX, which represents the buying or selling pressure specific to a currency in the foreign exchange market, and exchange pressure RINDEX pair, which represents the differential pressure between the two RINDEXs, we can eliminate rate noise and capture the core trend of market correlation. This allows us to objectively quantify fluctuations in the prevailing rate. In other words, we provide a measure for the market expression, currency depreciation and appreciation. Users will then learn that the ranking of RINDEXs, the ranking of RINDEX pairs, and the fluctuation ranking of prevailing rates generally coincide. They will also learn that the positive or negative direction of the major correlation determines the positive or negative direction of the minor correlation. This allows us to define minor correlation, the main component of market correlation, as being determined by the major correlation, and exchange pressure, its component, as being determined by the difference in fluctuations between the two currency pressures. Filled square how to read the table, major and minor correlations. The table is created for each of the major currencies with the largest circulation, the US dollar, the euro, the British pound, the Chinese yuan, and the Japanese yen. It captures major correlations between major currencies and minor correlations with other currencies. Filled square how to read the summary, pair composition. The RINDEXs of 50 currencies, including gold and Bitcoin, are ranked according to the following criteria. Filled square how to read the chart, rate decomposition. These charts measure the trends of the RINDEX pair and the market rate, measured at each weekend for the past 12 months and the most recent 4 weeks. These 3 lines represent the volatility rate, calculated from the closing price on December 31, 2019. Both are ordered by selling up and buying down. The colored text indicates weekly fluctuations, with black text indicating weekly selling and red text indicating weekly buying down. Here, fluctuations in the market rate can be explained by fluctuations in the 2 RINDEX values. This is called rate decomposition. This decomposition allows us to measure the fundamentals of each currency country. Filled square how to read the statistics, practical evaluation. There are 2 rows of statistics on the right side of the table. The top row shows the volatility of RINDEX, RINDEX pair, and market rates, ranked by pair value, based on the starting date of December 31, 2019. The bottom row shows the previous week's pressure, ranked in the same way as the top row, based on the previous weekend. The top row is stock value, and the bottom row is flow value. RINDEX is a comprehensive average volatility rate and has the greatest common denominator property. Therefore, it does not numerically match the volatility rate of market rates. However, RINDEX is effective in removing rate noise and capturing core trends. To verify this, the volatility rates of RINDEX pair and market rates are ranked. We evaluate the accuracy of each statistic to determine whether it is suitable for practical use. Filled square. How to interpret PTN correlation, correlation and differential pressure. The differential pressure calculation for the exchange pressure RINDEX pair has 3 patterns. A positive correlation between sells and sells, PTN1, a positive correlation between buys and sells, PTN2, and an inverse correlation between sells and buys, PTN3. PTN1 runs parallel in the negative direction in the vector view and is divided into an offsetting portion and a differential portion. PTN2 runs parallel in the positive direction, and the same applies below. Therefore, the 2 are positively correlated. PTN3, which has no overlap in the vector view, i.e., no offsetting portion, can be said to be inversely correlated. Next, a differential pressure develops between PTN1 and 2, which leads to a new division into sells and buys. This is called arbitrage. Ultimately, PTN ultimately resolves to PTN3. In other words, the bipolarity of correlation, the reciprocity of the reference values, is confirmed. Last week, the dollar RINDEX sold off. In terms of major correlations against the dollar, the pound and Japanese yen had a PTN1 correlation, while the euro and Chinese yuan had a PTN3 correlation. Minor correlations included 26 currencies with a PTN1 correlation and 23 with a PTN3 correlation. Excluding fixed rates, the consistency between the weekly fluctuations of the RINDEX pairs and the prevailing rates shows that the pressure rankings of the two are generally consistent, and the analytical accuracy is deemed practical. Chart number 34 shows the Iranian rial and dollar pressure from the previous week, recording a remarkable sell-off of the Iranian rial. The drop in gold prices can be seen as a precursor to the Israeli and U.S. airstrikes on Iran that were subsequently reported. However, this time, it is noteworthy that the yuan, which had previously been a dollar, has now become a PTN3. Pressure on other Middle Eastern currencies remains calm for the time being. Last week, the euro RINDEX was bought down. Major correlations were PTN2 for the Chinese yuan against the euro and PTN3 for the dollar, pound, and Japanese yen. Minor correlations were PTN2 for 22 currencies and PTN3 for 27 currencies. Excluding fixed rates and IRR, the consistency of the weekly fluctuations of the RINDEX pair and the market rate shows that the pressure order of the two is consistent and the analytical accuracy is deemed to be practical. Last week, the pound RINDEX was sold off. Major correlations against the pound were PTN1 with the dollar, euro, and Japanese yen, and PTN3 with the yuan. Minor correlations were PTN1 with 25 currencies and PTN3 with 24 currencies. Excluding fixed rates and IRR, the consistency of the weekly fluctuations of the RINDEX pair and the market rate shows that the pressure order of the two is consistent and the analytical accuracy is deemed to be practical. Last week, the RMB and RINDEX continued to sell off. Major correlations were a PTN2 correlation with the euro against the RMB and a PTN3 correlation between the dollar, pound, and Japanese yen. Minor correlations were a PTN2 correlation with 22 currencies and a PTN3 correlation with 27 currencies. Excluding fixed rates and IRRs, the consistency of the weekly fluctuations of the RINDEX pair and the market rate shows that the pressure rankings of the two are consistent, and the analytical accuracy is deemed to be practical. Last week, the Japanese yen RINDEX continued to sell off. Major correlations against the Japanese yen were a PTN1 correlation between the dollar and pound, and a PTN3 correlation between the euro and the Chinese yuan. Minor correlations were a PTN1 correlation with 26 currencies, and a PTN3 correlation with 23 currencies. The consistency of the weekly fluctuations of the RINDEX pairs and the prevailing rates, excluding the fixed rates and the Iranian rial, shows that the pressure rankings of the two are consistent and the analytical accuracy is deemed to be practical. Thank you for watching. Have a great week. Taro Tanabe reporting from Japan.